Well, welcome to Chapter 2, Strategy and Planning. Chapter 2 discusses a very important but often ignored responsibility of human resources. Strategy and planning basically determines where an organization and specifically human resources is going and how it will get there. We all know what planning is. Planning maps out our intended actions. But what's the difference between strategy and tactics? It's a good question, and one that many organizations obviously have difficulty understanding. I look at it like this, and maybe some would disagree, but I think it's pretty simple. Tactics is doing things. You make a to-do list out of tactics. You check off the task when they are completed and move on to the next task. Many of the activities and jobs in the lower parts of the organization involve tactical processes. Tactics are often determined in the lower levels of the organization. Strategy gives direction to tactics. Strategy determines which tactics and what tasks are appropriate, useful, and acceptable. Strategies are usually developed at the higher levels of the organization. Attending college with the intent of becoming a professional in human resource management is a strategy. Determining your course load, order of courses, attending class online or in class, your acceptable grade expectations, etc. are tactics. But if your strategy is as stated previously and you focus your activities on the wrong classes or have expectations that a D is fine as a grade, your strategy may be fine, but your tactics are faulty. If you just take classes each semester that look interesting, you may have tactics, but actually have no strategy. Obviously, the chance of success in either scenario is limited. Do you have strategies in your home? I hope so. Do you or will you send your kids to school each day and just require that they attend? Do you monitor their grades, set expectations, and have a goal in mind for their graduation from high school and beyond? I hope so. Do you have an education strategy for your home? Do you have a financial strategy for your home? I hope so. Families that save for retirement, save for major purchases, save for children's advanced education have a financial strategy. You probably have a career strategy, a personal spiritual strategy, and on and on. I hope so. Strategy is not important to success, it is critical. Tactics are important too. As I pointed out earlier, you may have a good strategy, but the wrong tactics limit success. Generals in the military develop strategy for the battle and war. Lieutenants and soldiers carry out the tactics and tasks to support that strategy. Are you a soldier in your life, or are you a general in your life's plan? Organizations are the same. They have many strategies, of which the HR strategy is but one. However, a failed HR strategy or an HR strategy that doesn't support the overall organization strategy drives failure. And no HR strategy at all imposes additional vulnerabilities to the organization. This is an important chapter that sets the stage for the many other HR activities, programs, and initiatives we will discuss in future chapters. As an aside, this is an important chapter that presents interesting food for thought related to how we conduct our lives at home as well. We will discuss some of that in this lecture. So, are you a soldier or are you a general? Chapter 2. If you look in the text, the authors define strategic resource management as the use of employees to gain or maintain a competitive advantage. In other words, gain the ability to make money. And they further distinguish between strategy and strategic planning by defining strategy as the proposition an organization follows to compete successfully, and strategic planning as defining the strategy and allocating resources towards its achievement. Wow, when you put it like that, it sounds pretty simple, doesn't it? The complexity comes in when you consider that achievement of the strategy involves coordinating the strategies of all of the other entities in the organization. HR should have a strategy, Finance should have a strategy. Manufacturing, if appropriate, should have a strategy. Sales should have a strategy, etc. And all of those strategies should support one another in the overall organizational strategy. It's starting to sound a little more complex, isn't it? The trick is obviously in that coordination and melding of strategies. And the authors spend some time discussing the skill of thinking strategically. And as I said previously, that is one of my primary concerns with HR management in many organizations. Actually, it is a concern of many organizational entities. Sometimes finance doesn't think strategically. Sometimes sales doesn't think strategically, etc. And if you go into an organization and you're a leader and you don't or can't think strategically, you do that organization a great disservice and perhaps great harm. If you take only one thing from this chapter, and I hope you take much more, understand how to think strategically. Now you may be asking yourself, if people don't think strategically and it's so important, how are they thinking? Good question. The answer is that if not thinking strategically, people are usually thinking tactically. And as I said in the introduction, I look at tactical as the doing and strategy as the thinking or planning. Strategy tries to change or influence the future. It tries to change the future to look like success. Tactical thinking and actions tend to react to current realities. And keep in mind, thinking strategically is one thing, but success requires acting strategically as well. Thoughts are great, but relatively ineffective unless followed by action. Textbooks have a tendency to make the simple sound complex. They also tend to explain relatively common concepts as things that seem like new revelations or totally new inputs to our brains. Actually, many of these concepts, particularly in human resource management, are quite commonplace and often fill our daily lives. In turn, realizing that these concepts are a part of our daily lives generates understanding, but also facilitates learning. We can perhaps use the text to garner a new understanding of and improvements in our use of the concept. Such is the case of this concept of strategic planning. So, what is this concept of strategy and planning, and is it worth devoting a whole chapter? Well, the answer is unequivocally yes. Strategy and planning is the basis for a successful organization. Regardless of the industry or endeavor, successful strategy development and planning spells the difference between success and failure. I believe this is true in our personal lives as well. I'd like to start this chapter discussion by taking us a little off target and make a few general points about strategic versus tactical thinking. I like to think of tactical thinking or actions as the doing things, strategic as the planning things. In the last chapter, I was critical of HR professionals as being too tactical and not nearly strategic enough. By that, I mean that HR professionals often don't look and plan ahead. Instead, they react. But when they do look ahead, they often don't try to change or influence the picture they see. They accept the image and try to employ the proper HR tools to meet the challenge. Leaders see and plan in the future and also try to influence that image. Let me give you an example of strategic versus tactical that is close to home. What is your strategic plan? Do you have one? Actually, do you have several? I suspect you do, and you should, but perhaps you don't even realize it. You thought strategically and continue to do so as you plan your career, which included taking this class. Your strategic plan includes obtaining a degree and ultimately a job. Taking this class is a tactical step along that path. The strategy is a decision about where you want to go, and the tactics are how you get there or the steps you take. And some of where you want to go and how you will get there depends on where you are at the time of the decision. When you decided to go to college and seek a career, your selection of a school and your decision to pursue that strategy depended somewhat on where you were or the situation you were in. At the time you made those decisions, you considered your grade point average in previous schools, the job opportunities in that career field, your financial situation, the time you were willing to devote to the effort, other opportunities that were available to you, the support group you had available, and probably many other data points. In textbook terms, you did an environmental scan or SWOT analysis. You identify the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats in terms of your reaching the goal of a degree and a career. Organizations go through this process regularly. They go through it regularly because the situation changes and often the strategy and tactics change as well. Such is the case with you or perhaps other students you know. The strategy is established to obtain a degree in a career in, let's say, medicine. But the situation changes. You may run into financial difficulty. You may find that the market for physicians is not as robust as you thought. You may discover that you don't really like working with the gore and the blood physicians often encounter. You may find that you no longer have the time to devote in years to reach that goal. Or you may find that something else interests you more and calls you in a different direction. In that case, your strategy changes and you do another SWOT analysis and develop new tactics and change directions. But to change directions without going through the decision process and forecasting, as we see here, is to invite trouble and increase the probability of failure. However, there are a couple of basic points I would like to make that are crucial to the success of a strategy. First, strategic planning requires decisions be made. Sounds simple enough, doesn't it? But I propose that decision making is much more complex and difficult now than in recent years. On the other hand, one can argue that strategic planning can be easier now than in the past since we have an almost endless supply of data to assist in the process. Even though all of that data can make strategic planning easier, it makes the final decision more difficult. Strategic planning is a process, but it leads nowhere unless someone decides to accept a particular direction. It's all process and no results. Your strategic plan for an education and a career required that at some point you make a decision and commit to a plan. Why is this difficult? Well, simply put, we have more choices. We have more choices about everything. Instead of choosing between 3 or 4 options, we choose between 20. Just to go to the grocery store and try to decide what you want for dinner. Too much information. We have to choose between taste and calories and chemical additives and convenience food or special prepared, or should we just forget the whole mess and go out to eat? Of course, we then have to decide which restaurant to choose, and once the choice is made, we are presented with a menu that looks like a brief novel, and we have to make a selection. Too many choices, too much data. Now, I realize that many would argue that it's a good thing, but the plethora of data has had a subtle impact on decision making that we are only now beginning to see, at least in my opinion. You see, instead of making the decision making process easier, the data impedes one from making decisions at all. We hesitate to make final decisions thinking that the data will reveal some small fact that will further mitigate the risk or take it away altogether. We look too hard for the perfect outcome. Decision making is a longer process today and often does not end in a real decision, but merely a reason to study the data further. The process results in no action. In addition, I have found that the stakes are higher today. When a decision is made, everyone expects the quality of that decision to be much higher than decisions, say, 25 years ago. We expect it because there is so much data available. If a decision is wrong or flawed in any way, we often look to the decision maker and say, didn't you look at the data? With the expectations higher, the consequences can often be higher as well. In the past, incorrect or flawed decisions eventually disappeared or faded into the past, and often only a few people were aware of the miscalculation. Today, everything is visible and visible for a long time. It is embedded in the data one studied so hard prior to making the calculation. Therefore, the decision-making process is impaired for individuals and organizations. Finally, decisions require commitment to be successful. They require the commitment of the parties to the decision and from others. Your decision to seek a degree and go to college required a commitment certainly from you, but from those around you as well. To put it differently, decisions are cheap. It's the action that's expensive. Without commitment, there is no meaningful action and therefore no real decisions at all. Now, I believe that all of this discussion about decision-making also applies to strategy. Decision-making requires one to finally dispel the data, know when enough is enough, and make a decision. Data can't make decisions for us. Leaders make decisions. Decisions and strategies require communication to those involved to get their commitment, understanding, support, and action. Strategies and decisions also involve risk. Risk is what really requires a decision. If there is no risk, a decision doesn't matter. Decisions and strategies also require regular monitoring and analysis to determine if they are correct or if they needed to be changed. So I believe that we have established that you have a strategy and engaged in a strategic planning process and decision making. But I suspect you didn't actually sit down and verbalize and document your strategic plan. You didn't consciously engage in the strategic planning process outlined in the text. I also suspect that if you did enter into a formal process, your plan would be much clearer, more complete, and in turn mitigate much more of the risks that you may encounter along the way. So who else engages in strategic planning? How about the government? We have seen countless stories on the news about the VA scandal, foreign policy blunders, immigration issues, etc. Was there a strategic plan that preceded these problems? I suspect there was. Either it was a bad strategic plan or it was not fully communicated to all parties and did not receive the commitment of the necessary parties to ensure success. The federal government is a good example of either no or poor strategic planning. The government also illustrates that even if a strategic plan and a subsequent decision is good, if a commitment is not obtained by all parties, chaos and failure follow with certainty. Whether we are talking about the government, a church, a business, an athletic team, the Red Cross, UNCG, or any other organization, a viable strategic plan is necessary for any success. Notice I said any success. Remember from Chapter 1 discussion, success and failure is on a continuum. I also mentioned that the closer you are to the success end of that continuum, the better. A strategic plan that is well constructed, well communicated, and well supported will bring any organization or person, for that matter, much closer to success and further away from failure. Where's your strategic plan? The text gives some good examples of strategic planning process involving human resource issues. They talk about strategic plan for workforce availability and internal workforce availability. In essence, they talk about forecasting demand and supply of labor. I'll not repeat those discussions here, other than to encourage you to read those sections. The insights provided are enlightening and accurate. The authors then delve into two topics that I believe require additional coverage. They discuss managing excess talent and mergers and acquisitions, which create, in many instances, surplus talent. Let's start with mergers and acquisitions, M&As, if you will. This is where two companies come together and combine their businesses into one. However, that is not to say that the parties have equal status in the joining. Normally, one organization is dominant and the other is subservient. When you have two organizations coming together to form one, the merging of two strategic plans, two value systems, two cultures, and two of everything else is required. They do not merge equally. One always dominates. So how do we combine one culture, for example, into another culture? Our values may be similar, but how do we combine one value system into another? How much does the subservient organization get to keep, and how much do they give up? If we ask them to give up too much, can they possibly commit to the new culture? If they lose their identity, do they lose their practical value? These are difficult questions, and answers are equally difficult. I worked for RCA Corporation when RCA was bought by GE. That was an acquisition. We were required to merge into the GE culture and do so quickly. At the time of the acquisition, I was working at Crown Wood Products, a wholly owned subsidiary of RCA. I received a phone call that the vice president of manufacturing, who was in charge of our facility, and I were to be next to a telephone at 6 a.m. in the morning to await another very important phone call. The phone call indicated that in a very few minutes, the media would receive an announcement of the acquisition. We were then to make a similar announcement to all employees. At the time of the announcement, we would be part of the GE Corporation. In other words, the deal was done, and we were told only minutes before the announcement became public. So how much time did we have to prepare to merge two such different cultures? We were given 0 time to prepare before the cultures were legally and practically merged. Now you may ask, why were we given so little time to prepare? The reason is a legal one and has nothing to do with employee relations. Governmental regulations require that prior notice to such a merger of public companies be kept confidential until the moment the deal is consummated. If people have knowledge of such a merger in advance, they can trade stocks on the market and realize significant profits that others not involved in the deal or announcement would not be able to take advantage of. It's called insider trading, and it's illegal, thus the secrecy. Now, I'm not saying that GE culture is bad and the RCA culture is good. I'm merely illustrating that in mergers and acquisitions, one organization is dominant, and the merging of those organizations is difficult. We at RCA believed that our culture was a good one, and giving up many aspects of that culture would be difficult if there was plenty of time to plan and prepare for the merger. With no time to prepare, the merger was beyond difficult and actually painful for RCA employees. On the other side of the M&A action, and I had been on both sides, the problem is different. In most M&As, the end result is 2 of everything. 2 corporate offices, 2 sets of HR, 2 sets of finance departments, 2 IT departments, and systems, etc. Do we need 2 of everything? Probably not. So what do we do with the excess? Obviously, some of the repeat assets must be deployed elsewhere. Are they deployed within the company? Are they deployed outside the company, which is called a layoff? Of course, that decision depends on the situation at hand. But make no mistake, all employees in the dominant organization and in the acquired organization know that these decisions must be made. Who will be considered excess? Who will lose their job? Although an M&A should bring greater opportunity for success to both companies, otherwise why would the organization enter into such an arrangement? It also brings substantial unrest to the organization and specifically to employees. The text states that, quote, after the deal is closed, the focus on HR activity switches to the orderly transition of basic HR processes such as payroll and benefits migration. During the first 60 days after the acquisition, HR must deliver high-quality administrative and operational support to employees and managers, end quote. Further down on that same page, the author asserts that, quote, as the businesses are merged, culture-based conflicts can emerge, end quote. I don't disagree with the authors that the tactical activities of payroll, benefits, and such matters must be transitioned smoothly. I don't think that those tactical issues are the prime concern of HR professionals. If need be, many of those issues can be outsourced and solved with system innovations and changes. I don't think that culture-based conflicts may emerge. I believe they will emerge. The text goes on to provide some solutions to the culture conflicts, and I agree with those solutions. That said, I believe the text minimizes the culture issues in lieu of the tactical issues that may arise. Culture integration and the unrest of employees has always been my primary concern in any M&A. The longer it takes employees, managers, and leaders to assimilate to the merger on both sides of the merger, the greater the danger of a failed or at least chaotic transition. HR is the one functional group in any organization dedicated to ensuring that company goals and actions are compatible with employee needs and vice versa, and further ensuring that compatibility is communicated to both parties. Remember from Chapter 1, HR is both an employee advocate and a company advocate. This leads us to the often used and often necessary solution of layoffs. Downsizing or layoffs are not just a solution for excess in M&As, but a solution to many other business issues. Decreased demand for product or services, increased competition, improved technology, poor hiring practices, natural market and economic influences, and more issues result in layoff. They are unpleasant to be sure, but they are necessary actions from time to time. And layoffs are not just a result of unrestrained pursuit of profits. Governments and nonprofit organizations also employ layoffs to address poor business conditions. Unpleasant but necessary sums it up. Now, I do agree that some organizations use layoffs to mitigate poor management decisions. Some companies hire too freely and when business turns down, must lay off excess people. But by and large, layoffs are as distasteful to the people performing the layoffs as to those laid off or to the rest of us observing the process. I speak from far more experience in this subject than I ever wish to have. I have spent many sleepless nights before and after a layoff event coming to grips with the necessity and the rightness of the action. That said, I have discovered that the pain of the layoff process can be mitigated somewhat by sound, respectful practices, many of which are outlined in the text. Let me give you a real-life example of how the process should work. Let me start by detailing how layoffs have been traditionally handled by many businesses. Generally, planning for layoffs have been conducted in secret, and the results of the planning have been sprung upon employees by surprise. The philosophy was that we should not reveal to employees that a layoff was imminent because it would compromise their ability and desire to work. Management also worried about employees engaging in sabotage in the business in retaliation of the expected action. This type of action did not engender trust in employees and caused great unrest in employees during business downturns as everyone expected the layoff shoe to drop. Some organizations selected those to be laid off using seniority, job performance, or other criteria. The layoff process itself included notifying employees, usually in front of fellow employees, that they were wanted in the, quote, front office. They then engaged in the walk of shame. The affected employee knew exactly what was going to happen and that their lives and families were about to experience a major change. Upon reaching the front office, they were informed that their services were no longer necessary and they were escorted out of the facility with no more income, benefits, or opportunity. They were left to their own devices to explore a bleak and uncertain future. Meanwhile, the remaining employees were left to wonder when it would be their turn to take the walk of shame. This dehumanizing effort was accepted manner for effecting a successful layoff. During my tenure at the Noel Group, it became apparent that our business was changing and we could not support the number of employees we had in the organization. A layoff was in the future, but not for at least 6 months. This time gave us an opportunity to plan for the new but smaller organization. But this time also presented a moral and ethical dilemma. Management was certain that a layoff would take place, but we were unsure of the date due to business commitments that must be fulfilled. During this time, employees were nervous. They also knew business was not ample to support the employment numbers. Employees felt that management knew more than they were telling, and employees were right. The dilemma was, do we, as management, tell employees of the layoff, or do we keep it secret? The risk of telling employees was, as I previously mentioned, that employees would not work to potential. Some may actually sabotage the operations. Some of our best employees would quit, and a number of other negative reasons we dreamed up. Suddenly it became obvious that we were not giving our employees any credit. We knew these people. We knew their families. We had solved problems together, worked through difficult times together, told employees how valuable they were and how much they meant to us. Now we found excuses not to be honest and not to trust them. Our choice was clear. We had to tell employees and give them the same information management possessed. We held company-wide meetings, explained that a layoff was in the future, and gave an approximate time of 6 months. We explained why the layoff was necessary and which positions would be affected. We further explained which employees were most vulnerable. We asked for volunteers to be placed on the layoff list. We called it the transition list because those employees were in transition. And we asked for cooperation of all employees to ensure the level of work and productivity remained high. We further announced that affected employees would be given severance pay and outplacement counseling to assist in finding other employment. We pledged to hold regular meetings to update information and keep employees appraised of the new developments. We believed our employees were good people, and good people would remain good even after receiving bad news. And indeed they did. There were no problems, productivity remained high, and employees continually expressed their approval at being treated like partners rather than subordinates. Now, don't misunderstand. No one was happy that there was an impending layoff. However, employees understood that it was a last resort and accepted it as necessary. Approximately 6 months after the layoff was performed, the affected employees knew well in advance so they could look for other employment and get their financial and family affairs in order. Some employees even gave going away parties and dinners for affected employees. This was truly a departure from how layoffs are normally handled, but makes perfect sense when you think about it. Companies are constantly telling employees that they are trusted and valued. Many say our most valuable assets are our employees. Shouldn't employees be valued in the bad times as well as the good? Shouldn't management treat employees as intelligent adults during bad times? The answer is absolutely yes. And the Noel Group management and employees proved that premise. And that is an example of how a layoff can be executed properly. The Noel Group example was a joint effort of management and employees. The layoff had both tactical and strategic aspects. In the end, all of the planning was important, but the decision to include employees and commitment of both employees and management to take action was critical to success. In other words, strategy and planning are important, but merely pass the time. Decisions, commitment, and action lead to success. Again, what's your strategy and your plan? What decisions have you made and what action have you taken? Hold on. If done properly, it will change your life.